I found out my parking lot had been illegally towed clean by the HOA on a Tuesday morning when my tenant called me screaming into the phone that her car was gone, and there were tire marks all over the asphalt. My name is Lucas Thompson, and I own a small commercial lot in Phoenix, Arizona that sits right at the edge of the Sunset Ridge community development. I bought it 5 years ago as an investment property, a flat piece of land about half an acre in size that I rent out to local businesses for employee parking. It's nothing fancy, just cracked pavement and a chain-link fence, but it generates decent income and never caused me problems until the Sunset Ridge HOA decided they owned everything within visual range of their precious community. The thing is, my lot isn't part of their HOA. Never has been. It's commercially zoned, sits on a separate parcel with its own deed, and I have all the documentation to prove it. But apparently, Barbara Henderson, the president of the Sunset Ridge HOA, didn't care about minor details like property rights and legal boundaries. When I got that call from my tenant Sarah, a manager at a veterinary clinic 2 blocks away, I was in the middle of eating breakfast. She was so upset I could barely understand her. Something about coming to work and finding the entire lot empty, except for a single sign that read, "Unauthorized vehicles towed by order of Sunset Ridge HOA." I drove straight there, still wearing my house slippers, and sure enough, the lot was completely empty. All 15 cars that had been legally parked there by my paying tenants were gone. The sign was zip-tied to my fence, and below the main message was a phone number for something called Randall's Towing and Recovery. I called the number immediately. A gruff voice answered on the 3rd ring. "Randall's Towing. This is Lucas Thompson. You apparently towed 15 vehicles from my property this morning. I need to know who authorized this and where my tenants' cars are." There was a pause, then the sound of papers shuffling. "Let me see here. Yeah, we got a call from the Sunset Ridge HOA. Said there were abandoned vehicles on HOA property. We got the authorization in writing from a Barbara Henderson." "That's not HOA property," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "That's my private commercial lot. You had no right to tow those vehicles." "Look, buddy, we just do what we're contracted to do. We got proper authorization from the HOA. If you got a problem, take it up with them. Meanwhile, those vehicles are in our impound lot accumulating storage fees at $75 per day per vehicle." I felt my blood pressure spike. $75 per day? You can't be serious. Dead serious. Plus there's the initial towing fee of $350 per vehicle. If the owners want their cars back, they can come pay up. I hung up and immediately called the number on the HOA sign. A cheerful voice answered. "Sunset Ridge Homeowners Association, this is Debbie speaking. I need to speak with Barbara Henderson immediately. This is Lucas Thompson." "Oh, I'm sorry, Mrs. Henderson is in a meeting right now. Can I take a message?" "Tell her she just illegally towed 15 vehicles from my private property, and I'm giving her exactly 1 hour to have them returned before I call the police and my attorney." Debbie's cheerful tone faltered. Let me see if I can interrupt her meeting." I was put on hold for what felt like an eternity but was probably only 3 minutes. Then a new voice came on the line, sharp and nasal. "This is Barbara Henderson. I understand you're upset, but I can assure you everything we did this morning was completely within our rights." "Your rights?" "That's my property you towed from. My commercial property that has nothing to do with your HOA. According to our community guidelines, any property within 200 feet of our development falls under our aesthetic and maintenance oversight. Your lot is an eyesore that diminishes our property values, and the vehicles parked there were in violation of our parking restrictions. I actually laughed at the absurdity. Your community guidelines don't apply to property that isn't part of your community. I own that land. I have the deed. You've committed theft and trespassing. I'd be very careful about making accusations, Mr. Thompson. We have an excellent legal team and we take the protection of our community very seriously. If you have concerns, you're welcome to attend our next board meeting on Thursday evening. I don't need to attend your meeting. I need you to return those vehicles immediately and compensate my tenants for any fees they've been charged. That's not going to happen. Those vehicles were removed from what we consider HOA property, and they'll remain impounded until their owners pay the appropriate fees. Good day, Mr. Thompson. She hung up on me. I stood there in my empty parking lot, staring at my phone in disbelief. I'd dealt with difficult people before, but this was beyond anything I'd experienced. This woman had actually convinced herself she had the authority to tow vehicles from property she didn't own. My phone started ringing immediately. It was Sarah again, and then another tenant, and another. All of them had arrived at work to find their cars missing, and all of them had gotten the same information from Randall's Towing. Some of them couldn't afford the fees. One was a single mother who needed her car to pick up her kids from daycare. Another had important medical equipment in his trunk. I told them all the same thing. Don't pay the fees. This was my problem and I would fix it. First, I called my attorney, a sharp woman named Patricia Wu, who I'd worked with on property deals before. I explained the situation, and I could hear her typing furiously as I talked. Okay, this is actually pretty straightforward, she said. They've committed conversion, which is essentially theft. They've also trespassed on your property. We can get an injunction and force them to return the vehicles, plus sue for damages. But that's going to take time, maybe a week or two. My tenants need their cars now, Patricia. Some of them can't go 2 weeks without their vehicles. I understand, but the legal system moves at its own pace. In the meantime, I'd suggest documenting everything. Take photos, keep all correspondence, and whatever you do, don't pay those towing fees. That could be construed as accepting responsibility. After I hung up with Patricia, I drove over to the address for Randall's Towing. It was exactly what I expected. A dusty lot surrounded by chain link and razor wire, with a portable office that looked like it had been there since the Reagan administration. The 15 cars from my lot were lined up near the back, looking forlorn under the Arizona sun. A heavy-set man with a clipboard came out when I pulled up. This must be Randall. Help you, Lucas Thompson. We spoke on the phone. I want to see the authorization you received from the HOA. He looked annoyed but went back into the office and returned with a folder. Inside was a letter on Sunset Ridge HOA letterhead, signed by Barbara Henderson, claiming that my lot was part of the HOA common area and that the vehicles parked there were in violation of community rules. This is completely fraudulent, I said. That's not HOA property. She's committed fraud by claiming it is. Randall shrugged. Not my problem, man. I got written authorization. I towed the cars. You want them back, pay the fees. I'm not paying anything. Those cars are going to be returned to my property, and you're going to be compensated exactly $0 for this illegal tow. Good luck with that. Meanwhile, the meter's running. $75 a day per car adds up real quick. I took photos of everything, the authorization letter, the cars, the lot, and left. I had an idea forming, one that Barbara Henderson was definitely not going to like. When I got home, I did some research on commercial towing laws in Arizona. What I found was interesting. Towing companies need proper authorization to tow from private property, which Randall's technically had, even though it was fraudulent. But there was another regulation that caught my eye. Towed vehicles must be stored at a registered facility, and the owner of the towed vehicle must be notified within 24 hours with information about how to retrieve their property. I called Patricia back. What if I claimed ownership of all 15 vehicles? What do you mean? They were on my property, parked there with my permission as part of a rental agreement. Could I argue that makes me a party to this whole situation and allows me to take action on behalf of the vehicle owners? She was quiet for a moment. That's creative, but I don't think it would hold up. You're not the registered owner of those vehicles. Okay, different question. What if I paid the fees under protest and then sued to recover them plus damages? That could work, but you'd be out thousands of dollars upfront. Let me think about this. While Patricia thought, I made more calls. I contacted the Phoenix Police Department and filed a report for theft and trespassing. The officer who took my report was sympathetic, but explained that because there was a civil dispute over property boundaries, they couldn't treat it as a criminal matter unless I could prove malicious intent. So if someone claims they own my property and tows cars from it, that's not theft. It's complicated, sir. We'd recommend resolving this through civil court. Frustrated, I posted about the situation in a local Phoenix community group on social media. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Dozens of people shared stories about HOA overreach, particularly from Sunset Ridge. Apparently, Barbara Henderson had a reputation for being tyrannical, fining residents for minor infractions like leaving garbage cans out an hour too long or planting the wrong color flowers. One comment caught my attention. It was from a woman named Zara Collins who lived in Sunset Ridge. She wrote, "Barbara Henderson has been making all our lives miserable for 3 years. She's fined me over $2,000 for ridiculous violations, including once for having a vegetable garden she claimed was not aesthetically appropriate. We've tried to vote her out, but she controls the board. If you're fighting her, you have my full support." I messaged Zara directly, and we arranged to meet at a coffee shop near the development. She turned out to be a woman in her early 30s, a software engineer who worked from home. She brought a thick folder of documents to our meeting. "I've been documenting every interaction with Barbara for the past year," she explained, spreading papers across the table. "She's absolutely out of control. The problem is, she and her 2 board members, Sharon and Patricia, they're all retired and have nothing to do but enforce rules that the rest of us never agreed to." I looked through the documents. There were fines for everything imaginable. Mailboxes that were the wrong shade of black, bushes that were 3 inches too tall, cars parked in driveways overnight even though the CC and Articus explicitly allowed it. "Has anyone tried to sue?" I asked. "A few people have. The HOA has deep reserves and just drowns everyone in legal fees until they give up. Most people just pay the fines and try to stay under the radar." "Well, she messed with the wrong person this time," I said. "That property she towed from isn't part of your HOA. I have irrefutable proof." "And I'm not backing down." Zara grinned. "Good. What can I do to help?" We talked strategy for over an hour. Zara knew the HOA's bylaws inside and out because she'd been fighting them for so long. She pointed out that according to the governing documents, any action that could result in legal liability for the HOA required a full board vote, not just the president's unilateral decision. "Did Barbara call a board meeting before authorizing the tow?" she asked. "I have no idea." "How would I find out?" "Board meetings have to be announced to all residents 72 hours in advance, and minutes have to be posted within a week. I can check the community portal." She pulled out her phone and logged into the Sunset Ridge resident website. After a few minutes of scrolling, she shook her head. No meeting announcement, no minutes. If she authorized that tow without a board vote, she violated the HOA's own bylaws. That's something the homeowners could use to remove her. This was getting better and better. Can you get me copies of all that? Already on it. That evening, I got a call from my insurance agent. Apparently, one of my tenants had filed a claim for the loss of use of their vehicle, listing me as the property owner where the vehicle had been parked. The insurance company wanted to know what happened. I explained the situation in detail. The agent, a guy named Tom who I'd worked with for years, was shocked. So let me get this straight. An HOA that has no jurisdiction over your property ordered vehicles towed from it, and now they're demanding payment for the tow and storage. That's exactly right. Lucas, this is fraud, clear as day. Have you filed a police report? Yes, but they said it's a civil matter. Maybe at the local level, but this crosses into criminal fraud if she knowingly misrepresented property ownership to authorize those tows. You might want to contact the county attorney's office. I hadn't thought of that. I thanked Tom and looked up the contact information for the Maricopa County Attorney's office. It was too late to call that evening, but I made a note to do it first thing in the morning. Meanwhile, my tenants were in crisis mode. Sarah had to rent a car to get to work, costing her $45 a day. Another tenant, James, ended up missing an important job interview because he couldn't get there without his car. The single mother, Maria, had her sister helping with kid pickups, but it was causing strain on the whole family. I felt responsible even though I'd done nothing wrong. These people trusted me to provide a safe, legal parking solution, and through no fault of my own, their vehicles had been stolen. That night, I made a decision. I called Patricia and told her to draw up a lawsuit against Barbara Henderson personally, the Sunset Ridge HOA, and Randall's Towing. I wanted to sue for conversion, trespassing, fraud, and any other applicable charges. And I wanted to include a claim for damages on behalf of my tenants who had suffered losses. This is going to be expensive, Lucas, Patricia warned. We're talking tens of thousands in legal fees, maybe more if it drags out. I don't care. This woman needs to be stopped, and she needs to understand that she can't just steamroll people because she has an inflated sense of authority. All right, I'll have the papers ready to file tomorrow. The next morning, I called the Maricopa County Attorney's office and explained the situation to a paralegal who connected me with a prosecutor named David Ramirez. He listened to my story with increasing interest. Mr. Thompson, can you send me all the documentation you have? The deed to your property, the authorization letter the HOA gave to the towing company, photos, everything. Absolutely. But can you tell me if this is something your office would prosecute? I can't make any promises, but if what you're telling me is accurate, there's definitely a criminal element here. Fraudulent representation for financial gain is a serious matter. Let me review what you have and I'll get back to you. I spent the next hour scanning and emailing documents. While I worked, I got a text from Zara. She'd done some digging and discovered that Barbara Henderson had a history of similar behavior. 3 years ago, she tried to claim jurisdiction over a community park that bordered the development, attempting to impose HOA rules on non-residents who used it. The city had to send her a cease and desist letter. She's got a pattern of trying to expand the HOA's authority beyond its legal boundaries, Zara wrote. This isn't the first time, just the first time someone's really fighting back. Armed with this information, I decided it was time to attend that HOA board meeting Barbara had mentioned. It was Thursday evening, 2 days after the illegal tow. I'd spent those 2 days gathering evidence, talking to attorneys and documenting every aspect of the situation. My tenants' cars were still impounded, now racking up their third day of storage fees, which by my calculation was over $3,300 in total, plus the original towing charges. The meeting was held in the community clubhouse, a modest building near the development's entrance. I arrived 15 minutes early and found about 30 residents already there, including Zara, who waved me over to a seat she'd saved. "Is it always this crowded?" I asked. "Never. Word got out that someone was challenging Barbara. Everyone wants to see what happens." At 7 o'clock sharp, Barbara Henderson walked to the front of the room, flanked by her 2 board members. Barbara was exactly what I'd imagined. A thin woman in her mid-50s with short blonde hair styled in that aggressive suburban mom way, wearing a blazer despite the Phoenix heat. She carried herself with the confidence of someone who'd never been seriously challenged. "Good evening, everyone. I'd like to call this meeting to order. We have a full agenda tonight, so let's begin with the financial report." I raised my hand. "Point of order. I'd like to address the board about the illegal towing that occurred on Tuesday." Barbara's smile was condescending. "Mr. Thompson, I presume? We have a process for public comments and it comes at the end of the meeting. Please hold your questions until then." "This isn't a question. It's a demand that you immediately return the 15 vehicles you illegally towed from my property and cease any further harassment." The room went completely silent. Every resident turned to look at me, then at Barbara. Her face flushed red. "Mr. Thompson, you are not a member of this HOA and you are disrupting our meeting. If you continue, I'll have you removed." "By who? You have no authority over me, just like you have no authority over my property." "But you sent a towing company there anyway, based on fraudulent claims that it was HOA property. That's theft, trespassing, and fraud." One of the other board members, a woman I assumed was Sharon, leaned over and whispered something to Barbara. Barbara's expression hardened. "The board made a decision based on community standards and property assessments. Your lot is a blight on our neighborhood, and we took appropriate action." "You had no board meeting," I said. I looked at Zara, who nodded. "According to your own bylaws, any action that could create legal liability requires a vote by the full board with proper notice to homeowners. You acted unilaterally, which means you violated your own rules." More whispers from the crowd. I could see some residents nodding, others looking shocked. Barbara was losing control of the room. "That's a matter of internal HOA governance and none of your concern," Barbara snapped. "It's very much my concern when your illegal actions affect my business and my tenants. I'm here to inform you publicly and with witnesses that I've filed a police report, contacted the county attorney's office, and my lawyer is filing a civil lawsuit against you personally, the HOA, and Randall's Towing. You're going to return those vehicles and you're going to pay damages." Barbara stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "This meeting is adjourned. Everyone out now." But the residents didn't move. Instead, a man near the front stood up. "Barbara, I'd like to call for an emergency vote of no confidence in your leadership. Your actions have exposed this HOA to serious legal liability, and if what Mr. Thompson is saying is true, you've committed fraud in our name. I move that you be removed as president effective immediately." The room erupted. Other residents started shouting their support, while a few of Barbara's allies tried to shut down the discussion. It was chaos, exactly what I'd hoped for. Barbara had ruled through intimidation and the apathy of busy homeowners, but once someone stood up to her, the facade crumbled. Sharon, the other board member, stood up and held her hands out for quiet. "Everyone, please. This is highly irregular. We can't just hold votes without proper procedure." "Actually," Zara said, standing up, According to Article 7, Section 3 of our bylaws, any homeowner can call for a vote of no confidence with a second from another homeowner. If a majority of homeowners present vote yes, the officer is removed immediately. It's specifically designed for emergency situations where the HOA's interests are at risk. I had no idea Zara had planned this, but I loved it. She'd been studying the bylaws for months, waiting for an opportunity. The man who'd made the original motion said, "I call for a vote." Do I have a second? At least 10 people seconded it simultaneously. Barbara was turning purple. This is absurd. You can't just overturn years of leadership because some outsider comes in here making wild accusations. They're not wild accusations, I said calmly. I have documentation of everything. Your authorization letter to the towing company, photographs of my property deed showing it's not part of the HOA, timestamps proving there was no board meeting. This is all going to come out in court, Barbara. The only question is whether your homeowners want to be liable for your actions. The vote was called. Out of the roughly 30 residents present, 23 voted to remove Barbara as president. Only 5 voted to keep her and 2 abstained. It was a landslide. Barbara stood frozen at the front of the room, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. Finally, she grabbed her purse and stormed out, slamming the door so hard the whole clubhouse shook. Sharon and the other board member, clearly uncertain what to do, remained behind. The man who'd called the vote approached me and shook my hand. "Thank you for having the guts to stand up to her. I'm Richard, by the way. I think a lot of us owe you a debt." Over the next hour, the remaining residents held an impromptu meeting to elect a temporary president and discuss next steps. They voted to immediately rescind Barbara's authorization for the tow and to send a letter to Randall's Towing demanding the vehicles be released at no charge. They also voted to hire an attorney to review all of Barbara's actions over the past 3 years to determine if other illegal or inappropriate decisions had been made. It felt good, but I knew the fight wasn't over. The cars were still impounded, and Randall's wasn't going to release them just because the HOA changed its mind. They wanted their money. I stayed after the meeting to talk with Richard and Zara. Richard, it turned out, was a retired lawyer who'd moved to Sunset Ridge for the weather and the golf courses. He offered to help coordinate between the HOA's new leadership and my attorney. The HOA should cover all the towing and storage fees, he said. Barbara was acting in her capacity as president, even if she exceeded her authority. The HOA is liable for her actions. What if they don't have enough in reserves? I asked. Then they'll have to do a special assessment on all the homeowners. Which is another reason they should have been more careful about who they elected to lead them. I went home that night feeling like I'd won a major battle, but the war was far from over. My tenants still didn't have their cars, and with each passing day, the fees mounted. The next morning, I got a call from David Ramirez at the county attorney's office. "Mr. Thompson, I've reviewed your documents. I'm going to be honest with you. This is a strong case for fraud. Miss Henderson knowingly misrepresented property ownership to authorize a towing action that benefited her and her organization. The fact that there's a pattern of this behavior makes it even more serious. I'm recommending we open a criminal investigation." What does that mean, practically speaking? It means I'll be contacting Miss Henderson and the towing company for interviews. We'll gather evidence and determine if we have enough to bring charges. If we do, she could be facing fines and potentially jail time for fraud and false statements. How long does that process take? Could be a few weeks, could be a few months. Criminal investigations take time. But in the meantime, the fact that there's an investigation might motivate the parties involved to make this right. I thanked him and immediately called Patricia to update her. "That's excellent news," she said. "I'll mention the criminal investigation in our civil filing. It'll put pressure on everyone involved. Speaking of which, I'm filing the lawsuit this afternoon. We're suing Barbara Henderson personally for fraud and conversion, the Sunset Ridge HOA for vicarious liability, and Randall's Towing for participating in an illegal seizure of property. What are we asking for? Full return of all vehicles, reimbursement of all costs incurred by your tenants including rental cars and lost wages, punitive damages against Henderson, and attorney's fees. I'm estimating we'll ask for about $150,000 in total." I whistled. That was more than I'd expected, but Patricia explained that we needed to send a strong message that this kind of behavior had serious consequences. The lawsuit was filed that Friday afternoon. By Saturday morning, it was all over the local news. The story had everything reporters loved: an out-of-control HOA, stolen cars, a David versus Goliath legal battle. I did 3 different TV interviews over the weekend, standing in front of my empty parking lot explaining what had happened. The publicity was exactly what I needed. By Monday morning, Randall's Towing was getting so many angry calls and negative reviews that Randall himself called me directly. "Look, man, I don't need this headache. I was just doing what I was contracted to do. How about this? You pay me the towing fees, forget the storage, and we call it even." "How about this?" I countered. "You release the vehicles immediately at no charge, and I don't include you in the criminal complaints. The county attorney is very interested in your role in all this." There was a long silence. "You're serious about the criminal thing?" "Dead serious." "You participated in what you knew or should have known was an illegal tow. That makes you liable." "I had written authorization. From someone who didn't own the property. Did you verify her claim? Did you check any property records? Or did you just take her word for it because she was paying you?" Another silence. "Let me talk to my lawyer." "You do that. In the meantime, those storage fees keep adding up, and when I win my lawsuit, you're going to be paying them, not collecting them." I hung up feeling satisfied. The pressure was working. That afternoon, I got an unexpected visitor at my house. It was Barbara Henderson, and she looked terrible. Her hair was messy, she had bags under her eyes, and her clothes looked like she'd slept in them. "Can I come in?" she asked quietly. I considered saying no, but curiosity won. I led her to the living room and we sat down. "I want to apologize," she began. "I let my authority go to my head. I genuinely believed I was protecting the community, but I see now that I crossed a line. Several lines, actually. Is this your lawyer talking, or you?" "Both, probably." "But I mean it. I never intended for this to become such a disaster. I just wanted the neighborhood to look nice, to maintain property values. That parking lot of yours, it's right at the entrance to our development, and it's such an eyesore. So your solution was to steal cars from it." She flinched. "I didn't think of it as stealing. I thought I was enforcing community standards on property that isn't part of your community. I know that now. My lawyer has been very clear about how badly I messed up. The HOA's insurance might not even cover this because I acted outside my authority. I could lose my house, Mr. Thompson." I felt a twinge of sympathy, but only a twinge. Her actions had hurt innocent people who just needed somewhere to park their cars. "What do you want from me, Barbara?" "I want to know what it would take for you to drop the lawsuit. I'll pay to get the cars released. I'll pay for all the rental cars and the other costs. I'll even pay to have your parking lot repaved and cleaned up. Just please don't destroy my life over this." "You should have thought about that before you committed fraud." I know I should have, but I'm here now trying to make it right. Please." I thought about it. The cars being returned and my tenants being compensated was really all I'd wanted in the first place. The lawsuit was about forcing accountability, but if Barbara was willing to take accountability on her own, maybe we could resolve this without months of litigation. "Here's what I want," I said. "First, you're going to pay Randall's Towing whatever they want to release those cars immediately today. Not tomorrow, today. Second, you're going to reimburse every single one of my tenants for any costs they've incurred, including rental cars, Uber rides, lost wages, all of it. Third, you're going to sign a legally binding agreement that you and the HOA will never claim any authority over my property again. And fourth, you're going to personally apologize to each of my tenants." "Done," she said without hesitation. "All of it. I'll do all of it. I'm not finished." "Fifth, you're going to resign from the HOA board entirely, not just as president. And sixth, you're going to make a public statement admitting what you did wrong and apologizing to the community." She looked pained at that last one, but she nodded. "Okay, if that's what it takes. And one more thing. You're going to pay my legal fees, all of them. Patricia's retainer was $10,000 and I want that back plus any additional fees we've incurred." "That's fine. Can we do this today? Can we settle it all right now?" I called Patricia and explained the situation. She was skeptical but agreed to draft a settlement agreement on the spot. Barbara called Randall's Towing while we waited, and I could hear her negotiating. The final number for releasing all 15 cars, including the towing and storage fees, was just over $11,000. Barbara agreed to wire the money that afternoon. By 6 o'clock that evening, all 15 cars were back in my parking lot. My tenants were overjoyed. Sarah actually cried when she saw her car, and Maria hugged me so tight I thought my ribs might crack. Barbara came by the lot with her checkbook and apologized to each tenant individually. Some accepted graciously, others were colder, but everyone got their apology. She also wrote checks to cover their expenses, which ranged from a few $100s for rental cars to over $1,000 for James, who'd lost the job opportunity. The settlement agreement was signed that night. Barbara agreed to pay me $18,000 total. $11,000 for the towing company, $5,000 to reimburse my tenants, and $2,000 for my legal fees. Patricia assured me that the agreement was airtight and that if Barbara violated any term, I could immediately resume the lawsuit. I thought that would be the end of it, but David Ramirez called me the next day. "Mr. Thompson, I understand you've reached a civil settlement with Miss Henderson." "That's right. She's made everything right, paid all the fees, apologized to everyone. I'm glad your clients are whole again, but the criminal investigation is continuing. What Miss Henderson did goes beyond a civil dispute. She committed fraud, and there needs to be accountability at the criminal level to deter this kind of behavior in the future." "What does that mean for her?" "It means we're moving forward with charges. I wanted you to know so you're not surprised when you see it in the news." 2 weeks later, Barbara Henderson was formally charged with 1 count of fraud and 2 counts of false statements to a business entity. The charges were misdemeanors, not felonies, but they carried potential jail time of up to 6 months per count. The story exploded in the local media again. National news outlets picked it up as an example of HOA overreach and the importance of property rights. I did more interviews, always careful to say that while I was satisfied with the civil settlement, I supported the county attorney's decision to pursue criminal charges. Barbara's trial was scheduled for 3 months later. In the meantime, the Sunset Ridge HOA underwent a complete transformation. Richard, the retired lawyer, became the new president. They rewrote many of the more oppressive rules, reduced fines across the board, and instituted new oversight procedures to prevent any one person from wielding too much power. Zara told me that the community felt like a completely different place. People were actually talking to each other, working together, instead of living in fear of arbitrary fines and punishment. As for my parking lot, I took some of the settlement money and invested in real improvements. I had the whole surface repaved, installed better lighting, and put up a nice fence with proper gates. I even planted some landscaping along the edge that bordered Sunset Ridge, figuring it couldn't hurt to be a good neighbor. The trial, when it finally happened, was anticlimactic. Barbara pled guilty to all charges in exchange for a sentence of 200 hours of community service, 3 years of probation, and a $5,000 fine. She also had to take a course on property law and ethical leadership. No jail time, but a permanent criminal record. I attended the sentencing hearing. Barbara looked diminished, smaller somehow than she had during our confrontation. When the judge asked if she had anything to say, she stood and addressed the court. "I want to apologize again to Mr. Thompson, to his tenants, and to the Sunset Ridge community. I let my desire for control override my judgment and my ethics. I hurt people who didn't deserve it, and I damaged the community I was supposed to serve. I accept full responsibility for my actions, and I'm committed to making amends." The judge nodded. "Miss Henderson, HOAs serve an important function in many communities, but they are not above the law. Your actions were a serious abuse of authority and a violation of trust. I hope this sentence serves as a reminder that power comes with responsibility and that there are consequences when that power is misused." After the hearing, I ran into Barbara in the hallway outside the courtroom. We looked at each other for a long moment. "I really am sorry," she said. "For what it's worth." "I know you are, and for what it's worth, I hope you land on your feet." She gave me a small smile and walked away. The whole experience changed how I thought about property ownership and community governance. I'd always been a fairly hands-off landlord, content to collect rent and let my tenants do their thing. But I realized that ownership comes with responsibility to defend your rights and the rights of those who depend on you. My parking lot business actually grew after all the publicity. Other businesses in the area reached out, wanting to rent spaces for their employees. I was able to raise my rates slightly, and the improvements I'd made meant I could charge premium prices. What had started as a passive investment became a thriving little enterprise. I also got involved in local advocacy work around HOA reform. Arizona, like many states, has pretty loose regulations on what HOAs can and can't do. I testified before the state legislature about my experience, and while no laws changed immediately, I helped raise awareness about the potential for abuse. Zara and I became friends through the whole ordeal. She eventually moved out of Sunset Ridge, finding a house in a neighborhood with no HOA at all. She said she'd had enough of community governance to last a lifetime. As for Randall's Towing, they lost their contract with several HOAs in the area after the publicity from my case. Randall himself sold the business 6 months later. I can't say I felt bad about it. He'd been complicit in the illegal tow, even if he claimed ignorance, and there were consequences for that. The settlement money Barbara paid me ended up being reinvested into my properties. I bought another lot in a different part of Phoenix and turned it into a similar parking operation, though this time I made absolutely sure to verify that there were no HOAs anywhere nearby with delusions of expanded authority. 1 year after the whole ordeal began, I got a letter in the mail from the Sunset Ridge HOA. It was an invitation to their annual community barbecue, signed by Richard as president. The note at the bottom read, "We'd love to have you as our guest." After everything, we figure you're practically an honorary member of the community. Plus, it would be great to show you how much things have changed." I decided to go. The barbecue was held in the common area, a nice grassy space with picnic tables and a playground. Richard greeted me at the entrance with a firm handshake and a genuine smile. "Lucas, glad you could make it. Come on, let me show you around." The atmosphere was completely different from that contentious board meeting a year earlier. People were relaxed, laughing. Kids were running around playing. Several residents came up to thank me for standing up to Barbara and forcing change in the community. One older gentleman who introduced himself as Harold said, "You know, I was ready to sell my house and move before all this happened. Barbara had made my life miserable, fining me for every little thing. But now, I'm glad I stayed. This feels like a real community again." I spent a few hours there, eating burgers and talking with residents. They told me stories about the positive changes that had been implemented: more transparent finances, actual community input on decisions, reasonable enforcement of rules that made sense. The HOA was functioning the way it was supposed to, as a tool to maintain common areas and handle shared responsibilities, not as an instrument of control. As the sun started to set over Phoenix, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, I stood at the edge of the common area looking out toward my parking lot. From this angle, with the new pavement and landscaping, it actually did look pretty good. Not an eyesore at all, just a functional business operating peacefully next to a residential community. Richard came up beside me, following my gaze. "You know, Barbara wasn't entirely wrong about one thing," he said. "What's that?" "Communities do need standards and people willing to enforce them. She just lost sight of the fact that those standards need to be reasonable, applied fairly, and most importantly, limited to the community's actual jurisdiction." Wise words from the new president. Well, I learned from watching What Not to Do. Barbara was a cautionary tale in real time. We stood there in comfortable silence for a moment, then Richard asked, "So, any chance you'd ever want to actually join the HOA? We'd love to have you and your lot as official members." I laughed. "Thanks, but I think I'll pass. I'm happy being your neighbor, but I've had enough of HOA governance to last a lifetime." Can't say I blame you. Driving home that evening, I reflected on everything that had happened over the past year. What had started as an outrageous violation of my property rights had ended up being a catalyst for positive change, not just for me, but for an entire community. Barbara had faced real consequences for her actions. My tenants had been made whole, and Sunset Ridge had transformed from a place of petty tyranny into an actual neighborhood. The whole experience reinforced something I'd always believed but now knew with certainty. When someone violates your rights, you have to stand up and fight back. Not with violence or aggression, but with documentation, persistence, and the law. It's not easy and it's not always quick, but it works. My parking lot continued to thrive. I never had another problem with the HOA, and Barbara Henderson faded into obscurity, completing her community service and keeping a low profile. I heard through Zara that she'd moved to a different state, somewhere without HOAs, and was working as a customer service representative at a department store. The 15 tenants who'd had their cars towed all stayed with me, and most of them still rent spaces to this day. We have an understanding now, forged through shared adversity. They know I'll fight for them, and I know they trust me to provide a safe, legal parking solution. Looking back, the whole situation could have gone very differently. If I'd been intimidated by Barbara's authority, if I'd paid the fees without fighting, if I'd accepted the premise that the HOA had any right to control my property, it all would have ended badly. My tenants would have been out thousands of dollars. Barbara would have continued her reign of terror over Sunset Ridge, and the pattern of abuse would have continued. But I didn't back down, and that made all the difference. These days, when I drive past my parking lot and see cars neatly lined up, I feel a sense of pride. Not just because it's a successful business, but because it represents something more. The principle that property rights matter, that authority has limits, and that ordinary people can stand up to overreach and win. The story became something of a legend in Phoenix property owner circles. I've been asked to speak at several real estate investor meetings about the importance of knowing your rights and defending them. My advice is always the same. Document everything. Know your boundaries, both literal and legal, and never assume that someone claiming authority actually has it. The criminal case against Barbara set a precedent in Arizona. Other HOAs became much more careful about their actions, knowing that there could be real criminal consequences for fraud and overreach. Several pending cases involving HOA disputes referenced my situation, using it as an example of where the line is between legitimate governance and illegal abuse of power. I also learned something about community and how it's supposed to work. The problem wasn't the concept of an HOA itself. It was one person being given too much power without adequate oversight or accountability. When Sunset Ridge reformed its governance structure, creating checks and balances and real resident input, it became what an HOA should be. A neutral entity that maintains common property and enforces reasonable standards with fairness and transparency. As for Barbara, I sometimes wonder what she's doing now and whether she learned anything from the experience. I like to think that she did, that she realized her mistake and became a better person for it. But I also know that some people never change, and that's okay too. What matters is that she was held accountable, and that the system worked, eventually, to correct the wrong she'd committed. The financial outcome was better than I could have hoped for. The settlement money, combined with the increased revenue from my improved lot and expanded business, meant that I actually profited from the whole ordeal. But more valuable than the money was the lesson I learned about standing up for yourself and the knowledge that I could navigate a complex legal situation and come out on top. My attorney, Patricia, became a good friend through all this. She told me later that my case was one of the most satisfying of her career because it was so clearly right versus wrong, with a good outcome for everyone except the person who deserved consequences. She's represented several other property owners in HOA disputes since then, using the playbook we developed together. The parking lot itself became a minor tourist attraction for a while. People would drive by to see that place where the guy fought the HOA and won. It was silly, but it also drove business. I even had someone offer to buy the property from me for double what I'd paid, figuring they could capitalize on the notoriety. I turned them down. The lot meant something to me now beyond just its financial value. In the end, the whole experience taught me that justice isn't something that happens automatically. You have to pursue it, document it, fight for it. You have to be willing to stand up when it would be easier to back down, to invest time and money when the outcome is uncertain, to endure stress and conflict because the alternative is letting wrongdoing go unpunished. I'm proud of how I handled it. I'm proud that I protected my tenants, that I held Barbara accountable, that I helped reform a broken HOA system. And I'm proud that my parking lot, that simple half-acre of pavement at the edge of Sunset Ridge, became a symbol of property rights and the importance of knowing your boundaries. The cars are still parked there every day, their owners coming and going without drama or conflict. It's exactly what a parking lot should be: functional, unremarkable, and operating within the law. No HOA Karen can take that away from me ever again.